At the forefront. The one thing that I hope Fred's going to talk about that hasn't come up today that's critical to this whole conversation, particularly the inclusiveness of the sector and of our economy generally in New York City, and what New York City can really bring to this conversation because of our great diversity, is education and the role that that has to play in sort of the next generation of activity. And I'm sure Fred, who's making a huge contribution on that front, will talk about that as well. So Fred Wilson.
Thank you, everybody. I'm supposed to wrap, but I'm not going to wrap because I missed the whole conference because I spent the morning at a job fair with about 400 high school students, all from underserved neighborhoods in New York City, who are taking computer science classes. And they came to Microsoft's office in Times Square to figure out how to get jobs, summer jobs, internships, jobs after college. And so Kathy's right, education and access for the underserved is, at the end of the day, probably the single biggest answer. And I just lost my microphone, which was not a good thing. So I think that that's critical, and we need to continue to focus on making sure that whatever we do works for everybody, not just a select few. But instead of wrapping, since I'm really not in a position to wrap, I want to talk about the future and what this conference is going to be about 10 years from now. I think that's a fitting way to end it. We all know that networks are replacing hierarchies. We all understand that when everybody's connected to each other all the time in real time, we don't need hierarchical systems to manage. We can use networks to manage things. And that's what every single one of these companies that was talked about today is doing. They're using a network-based architecture, network-based business model to reinvent an industry. That's what the sharing economy is all about. And I think peer networks are the most powerful networks of all, meaning that everybody's a peer in the system. There's no hierarchy whatsoever. That's the most powerful system of all. And we're headed to that. We're not there yet. We're probably in stage 1 of this revolution, not stage 3 or stage 5 or stage 10, because guess what? Your new boss is the same as your old boss. Okay, you're not working for the taxi boss, you're working for the Uber boss, but you're still a slave to the system. And that is not where we're going to be in the future. And the reason that's where we're not going to be in the future, it has to do with centralization versus decentralization. All of these systems today are still centralized systems. Facebook's a centralized system, Twitter's a centralized system, Uber's a centralized system, Airbnb is a centralized system. There is an operator who sits at the center of this network and dictates what happens in the network. That's because technology today essentially requires that. But we have fundamental changes going on in computer science right now that are changing that. And at the core of it are technologies like the blockchain and cryptography that are allowing trustless systems, systems that do not require a central clearinghouse. And I think over the next 10 years, that's the real innovation. That's what's really going to happen, is we are going to see decentralized systems emerge. If you want to look at where you can see this happening first and foremost, look at technologies like Bitcoin that are built on top of these blockchain-based architectures and study them and understand what happens and think about what can be built on top of those. So I just want to talk a little bit about that. We think about gambling without a casino. Think about stock trading without an exchange. Think about real estate transactions without deeds. Think about transactions without clearinghouses. That is the world we're heading into. And so we have just barely scratched the surface today. We're seeing evolutionary change, not revolutionary change. But we will see revolutionary change, and we will see systems that are self-governing. And when you think about a system that's truly self-governing and self-regulating, you will not need regulators. And what will regulators do when they see systems emerge that literally do not need them to regulate them? Okay, that's when we're really going to have problems. The friction that we've been talking about today is nothing compared to what we're going to see. So we're talking about the ultimate sharing economy is a sharing economy without middlemen, without somebody taking a fee. Okay? When somebody can drive you to where you're going and they capture 100% of the dollar value of that transaction and pay nobody for that, that is a truly distributed system. And so I think the interesting questions that I'll end with is, what's the right ownership model for that kind of a system? Is it a corporate system or is it something else? What is the role of capitalism in that system? Will there be venture capitalists? We're getting there, but we're not anywhere near there yet. And I, for one, am interested in thinking about these issues today and starting to get a handle on them before we enter this world. And so I think all of the questions that were asked today in some ways are precursors for much bigger questions. And I think it's great that we have all of the stakeholders in the system. We have people from government, we have people from the nonprofit sector, we have people from the for-profit sector, we have entrepreneurs, we have investors here today talking about these things. But the message that I really want to leave you all with is the problems that we're trying to solve today are, in my mind, precursors to much bigger and much more fundamental problems. What is the role of government? What is the role of capitalism? What is the role of corporations? I think those are real questions that we're going to have to grapple with in the next 10 or 15 or 20 years. Thank you very much.